Welcome to Hear Me Out. I'm your host, Spencer Demetros. Today we're going to start with a question. How do you get people to just do what they're supposed to? How do you get your colleagues, your employees, even your children to behave in ways that benefit everyone, including themselves? And the bigger question is, why don't they just do it on their own? Well, the answer to all these questions lie in the field of behavioral science. Today we'll hear from an expert in this area, Rehm. She'll share with us some interesting research on human behavior that just might surprise you. We'll also talk about how this research can be applied at work, in the community, and even in parenting your kids. We have a great show for you, so don't go away. Today, we're excited to have as our guest Rebecca Rehm, a compliance officer with Olympus Corporation. Rebecca is also a frequent speaker on several topics, including behavioral science and compliance programs within organizations. She applies these concepts not just in her professional life, but also studied them as a student at Williams College and as a grad student at Brown University. So we're so happy to have you here today. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thanks, Spencer. It's great to be here.
So why don't we start out by telling us a little bit about your behavioral science work and how that's applied kind of in your day job.
Yeah. So I've been in the field of ethics and compliance for over 11 years. And doing that as a consultant and an employee at mostly large global corporations. I currently am at Olympus Corporation. And just to say that the opinions I'm expressing are my own and don't necessarily represent Olympus. So as you know, Spencer, corporate compliance programs, it's all about trying to get people to do the right thing. Follow the policies, et cetera, right? And the standard way of doing that is you write a policy, you train people on it, you communicate about it, and you hope they're going to do the right thing. And oftentimes they do. They're fairly effective, but there's more. We don't always get everybody to do the right thing. And this is where behavioral science comes in. So behavioral science is the study of why people do what they do. Why do they make the decisions they make? And it's really interesting to me, and I think it's something that can really help us, whether you're a manager, a teacher, or a parent.
Excellent. So it sounds like a worthy endeavor. Basically getting people to do things that are good for the organization and for themselves. So in your studies and your research, is there anything that you think might be surprising to folks, something that they wouldn't expect in terms of people's behaviors?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I find most interesting. Some of it really is counterintuitive. So you tell people to do something and they'll do it, but that's not always the case. So I'll give you an example. One of the researchers, Robert Cialdini, and he did some interesting research on littering. So of course the goal is to have people not litter. So what he did was he and his researchers set up a scenario in a parking lot. They put paper flyers on people's windshields under their windshield wiper. And in some of those parking lots, there was litter all over the ground. It was very evident. And some, there was no litter. It was very clean. And so they watched to see what people did when they got back to their cars. So in the area where there was litter all over the ground, people got back to their cars and they often took the flyer off and threw it on the ground. They also littered. Now in the scenarios where there was no litter anywhere, the people got back to their cars, took the flyer, and they either put it in their car or they put it in the trash most of the time. And so what it shows us is people do what they see others around them doing. They do what they think is expected of them. And it's not necessarily based on, you might say, oh, well, the people who are really, pro-environment are going to be the ones who always put it in the trash or put it in the car, but that's actually not what they found. It was really based on what was being done around them.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because the request or the requirement is don't litter.
Right.
And you would think that if you're in an environment where there's a lot of litter, people would appreciate the importance of not littering.
Right.
Instead, it was like what overrode was what everybody else is doing. I guess the herd mentality. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's an example, when there was a lot of, kind of early in the environmental movement, there were, TV advertisements trying to encourage people not to litter. And one pretty famous one was this person canoeing, a Native American person canoeing in a body of water, and there was litter bottles everywhere. And the idea was, look at this terrible landscape with all this litter, don't litter. Well, what Cialdini said is a better TV ad would have been showing a pristine landscape with no litter, because it would make people think, oh, people don't litter here, I shouldn't litter either.
Yeah,
so it's a little counterintuitive.
Yeah. I remember that ad.
Yeah.
It was a long time. It was in the 70s. I was a kid. And it affected me in a positive way. I don't know what Caldini would say about that, but because at the end, the Native American was looking at the land and all the litter, and that tear came down to his eye.
Yeah.
And I thought, like, I gotta stop throwing things out the window of the car.
Yeah.
It's funny that the herd mentality, I think, is so powerful, though. I've actually used it as a parent myself. My son, Christopher, he's always had, I guess you call them sensory issues, tactile issues. How things feel on his skin. He hates lotions, doesn't even like toothpaste, doesn't like soap. In fact, I got a call one time from the preschool, and the teacher said, Christopher is not using soap, and we get it, he doesn't like it, but washing your hands is a requirement of the school, so he has to use soap. So my wife and I literally had to buy 10 different soaps, different smells and feels, and he got to pick one, and that was his soap. But I remember one time we were living at our old house, and so he was probably 3 years old, 3.5, and it was the first really hot day of the year. And, there was something about, he got used to long sleeve shirts over the winter. And he hadn't worn a t-shirt in 5 months, and not only does he have tactile, he doesn't like change, so refused to wear a t-shirt. We went to the playground, it was 90 degrees out, and I said to him, Christopher, I want you to look around and notice you're the only one wearing a t-shirt here. I get it, you don't like it, but if you're one of those kids that are always giving in to your quirks and your likes, you're going to be that kid, and I don't want you being that kid. Now, I guarantee you there's people out there that are looking at this and, maybe a child psychologist saying that was the worst thing you could say to a kid, but it actually worked. He kind of paused, and he looked around, and, I think after that he wore his t-shirt. So anyway, real world example of the kind of that herd mentality. So what other triggers for behaviors, in various research, do you think might surprise people as well?
Yeah, so there's an example when we talk about leaders. So Dacher Keltner talks about what he calls the power paradox. So a lot of people rise to leadership, whether that's at a corporation or politics or whatever, by doing good for others. They think about others, they do good, they're very successful, and they rise to that leadership position. But what's really interesting is when people get to the leadership position, they often they have these feelings of power. They're the decision maker, people look up to them. And they're actually, what they found is they have higher levels of dopamine in their brain. And that leads them, there's a correlation with a lesser ability to empathize with others. So you have people, of course not everyone, but people in power positions who are less able to empathize, and it leads to some really negative behaviors, such as being really selfish. There's a study I read about how people with higher leadership positions are more likely to go through pedestrian walkways because they think they have so little time, and their time is so important that they're just going to rush through. They're going to speed, that kind of thing. And so, of course, we don't want our leaders to be people who can't empathize and are selfish and breaking the rules and things like that. And so there are a couple things that the research shows can help with that. So one is for someone who feels that feeling of power, to do something that they're not so skilled at, so it reduces their feelings of power. And it actually changes the brain a little bit so that they can then actually empathize with others. So I don't know, if you have a CEO who's great at financials and great at public speaking, maybe at the company softball tournament, and maybe they're not good at softball, they play that and it reduces their feelings of power, and then they can better empathize and be a more effective leader. There's also research that shows if people in leadership positions expose themselves to other people who are just different from them, it allows them to empathize and, again, be a more effective leader.
Yeah, wow, interesting. I mean, what I find fascinating is it sounds like the behaviors that are effective, which is behaving empathetically and less selfish, maybe get you to that position of power, but once you're there, that doesn't make for effective leaders. That empathy is actually a good thing for people to have. I guess the tricky part would be, at least for some of the people I worked for in corporations, would be get them to believe that feeling less powerful and more empathetic and kinder is actually going to make them more effective. Some of them I'm not sure would buy it.
Yeah.
But I guess once, if they do, and as a consultant you can come in and probably convince them of that, then it's just a matter of getting them outside their comfort zone.
Yeah.
So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think what I find the most interesting is that what the science tells us is you can't just tell someone, you can't say, hey, you're a leader, and you're likely not to be able to empathize as well with people. Could you work on empathizing? You know, that's important. They might say yes, but being in that power position literally prevents them from it. So they have to recognize that this is a problem when you're in a leadership position, and they actively need to remove themselves from it in some way, right? It's not just saying, oh yeah, empathy is important, I'm going to be more empathetic. They literally can't. Right. They have to remove themselves from that power position in order for their brain to be able to empathize. There's something about being in that leadership and that power position that changes the way we think.
So it's almost physiological.
Yeah, that's what the science tells us.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
So for those of us who have worked in corporate jobs, in management, know how difficult it can be at times to get people to follow the rules.
Yeah.
Even sometimes regulatory rules that are rules outside the company that are actually imposed by law. So, and we also know that, you know, disciplinary measures aren't always effective, you know, having a big stick. And apart from that, it's also could be very, you know, resource intensive, time consuming, and frustrating. So are there other techniques, mechanisms that can be used to, you know, obtain behaviors in corporations for compliance purposes?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, a lot of governments in the past, I would say decades, have started utilizing something they call nudging. And this is, you know, based on Cass Sunstein's research. And now corporations, it's kind of starting to be a trend. So nudging is a way to influence behavior in a certain direction, but it has to be really easy to avoid and cheap to avoid. You know, a $5,000 incentive is not a nudge. It has to be a little more simple. So there are a couple of examples. So the way governments have used this, a well-known example is with organ donation. So, you know, let's say you're going to sign up for your driver's license, and in the past, most governments have had opt-in programs. They say, if you'd like to opt in to donate your organs, if you were, for example, in an accident, please check this box. And what they found was the research at the time was saying, well, if we do an opt-out program, that we may have more people who actually, you know, are a part of the organ donation program. So instead, they say you are opted into the organ donation program unless you check this box to opt out. So there's a trend that governments are moving toward the opt-out way for organ donation. Now, there's a little bit of nudging. It's interesting. It's a little newer, and there's some evidence that it's effective, but the effects may be small, and there's some controversy around how effective it is, and I think it depends on the setting. But it can help to nudge behavior along. But the really important thing, especially in an example like this, that's such an important life decision, is that ensuring we're preserving personal autonomy, right? Who's making the decision about what the right behavior is? And are we ensuring people are a part of that decision? Because what we don't want is a big brother society where government's controlling, you know, actions and things like that. We want to make sure people are informed about their decisions and what they're doing.
Yeah, very interesting. You know, I guess in my, you know, professional life, as an attorney in a corporation, I would see, you know, the concept of opting out or opting in as maybe arguably as a way of nudging people to do what you want them to do. I see it with, you know, vendors and suppliers who are providing some kind of subscription service who have automatic renewals of contracts that you have to like physically opt out of. In some states, they don't even allow those as enforceable because it's viewed as not so much nudging, but, you know, kind of playing on people's inertia. You know, they just didn't know that the contract was up for renewal, and maybe there was a notice, but who saw it? Right. So I guess that's where there's a line between, you know, kind of nudging, giving people a little incentive to do something versus, you know, using it in a way to get people to sign up or do something that they really don't want to do. Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in kind of just the you know, out there in the real world, are there other, you know, subtle examples of nudging that, don't cross that line or don't even come close to the line?
Yeah. So one of my favorite ones is grocery store bags, right? So now we all try to bring our reusable bags to the grocery store, and many stores have implemented a small fee if you don't bring your reusable bags, if you actually use the bags they have. So that's, few cent fee is a small nudge. It's easy to avoid, or easy to avoid the nudge, I guess. You can pay the fee, and it's not a huge burden. But it's that little thing that when you see those few cents charged to your receipt, you hopefully nudges you to bring your bags the next time. So that's kind of a practical example.
Yeah, that's an excellent example. That's actually one that's worked on me. For years, I've felt really bad about throwing away all my plastic, and we buy a lot of groceries, so throwing a lot of plastic bags. And when I saw that, it's funny, to buy like the really nice plastic bags, now they charge 25 cents. It's not the money, it's more this idea that like I'm not doing the right thing. Now I actually have to pay for it.
Yeah.
So it's, for me, it's doing something that I kind of meant to do and never got around to. Same with recycling garbage. For years, we'd get a barrel from our trash hauler, and any extra, if you had bags that didn't fit, it was just too much garbage, you just put your bags out next to the barrels. And at some point, they stopped doing that. And I called the company, and they said, well, you're not using your recycling barrel. If you use that, you'd have plenty of room. And I said, oh, geez, here I go. Okay. So I did. And again, I knew we should recycle. And I was kind of almost glad that they like made me do it. So I guess you can consider that a nudge. But I think it achieved the goal, and the goal was actually something that I wanted to do as well. So I think that's a good example. So many of us are parents. Trying to get our kids to do the right thing is a whole nother ball of wax. Are there techniques that you think might be effective for parents who are just trying to get their kids to do the right thing?
Yeah, so I think about this a lot, Spencer, with 3 teenagers. Definitely trying to, help my kids do the right thing is top of mind every day. So I'll share a couple of examples. Right after college, I went and taught at a girls' boarding school. And so I was teaching high school biology. I was a dorm parent and coach. And so as a dorm parent, one of the rules in the dorm each school night was quiet hours. A couple hours of quiet hours, and during that time, the girls couldn't shower. Need to be totally, quiet on the hall. So I was on duty dorm parenting, and I'm noticing that girls are showering during quiet hours, so they're breaking the rules. So I said, oh, well, they clearly need a reminder. I'm going to get a piece of paper and tape it to the bathroom and remind them no showers during quiet hours. Well, of course, the next time I walked through, the sign was taken down, and the girls continued to shower. So my reminder was not really effective. So a few weeks later, I had another duty as a teacher there, which was evening study hall. So this was for students who maybe had missed an assignment, weren't doing great in school, needed some supervised study hall. And so we were in a classroom in the school, probably about 20 girls, and I was on duty. It was about a 2-hour study hall. And the rules for the study hall were silence for 2 hours, unless you have to go to the bathroom or ask maybe the teacher a quick question. And so I said, that is a long time for these kids to sit. Let me think about this and approach it a little differently. So I announced at the beginning of this that I was going to give them kind of a favor. That I said, if you are quiet for the first half of this study hall, at halfway through, I will give you a 5-minute break, and you can talk and be as loud as you want. You can talk to your friends. You can move around. You don't have to do homework during that time. But you have to be quiet for the first half hour, or the first hour. And they all agreed to it, and they were silent for an hour. It was beautiful. And then they had their fun, their nice 5-minute break. They got to talk to friends and catch up and everything, and then they went back to studying. And it was such a lesson for me that, if you give that favor, you do a little something for someone, that they might follow through on what you want them to do. And what's interesting is the research supports that. So it's research on reciprocity. So this is why nonprofits often send you mailing labels in the mail and then ask for a donation, because they've given you a gift and you're more likely to donate. Same reason that Olive Garden leaves those nice little chocolates with the bill, because they've given you that gift, and the research has shown that they're more likely, they actually did research at Olive Garden, and the tips are higher for those who leave the candies. So that concept of reciprocity, I think, can help a lot with as a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to say, the the chocolate mints at the Olive Garden really did work. 'Cause we love those, and they give you a lot of them.
I know.
And we would leave bigger tips. And we'd also, there's a Target right next to our Olive Garden nearby, and we would also like leave the Olive Garden and then buy like 2 boxes of those Annie's mints, because it was never enough. There were a lot, but it was never enough. But yeah, you know, in parenting, I think, you know, I think there's parents who sometimes use the gift mechanism, the gift strategy more than they should, and some don't use it at all. I'm one of those. I think I started out as a very strict parent, and I have found that, of course, there's plenty of times when giving an incentive, giving something to, you know, show that, you know, your good heart to your kids, and that you're not just always saying no. It does help and does help bring about good behavior at times. So I think that's a great point. So this has been great, you know, and there's a lot of different concepts that I think folks can use, largely depending on the context. You know, some things probably work better in a corporate environment, some things maybe in a social organization, and some things maybe as a parent in family situations. Is there some, like, could you say there's like maybe some overarching principle or, you know, components of a kind of a unifying thread throughout a lot of these research findings that people can apply?
Yeah, I think so. So one of my favorite researchers, Dan Ariely, has done lots of TED Talks, and one I was watching recently, he summarized it in a really beautiful way. He said, the way to influence behavior is to reduce friction and increase motivation. So when we talk about reducing friction, we talk about making things easier. How can we make the right behavior easier and top of mind for people? And I think if we do that, because again, I think people are trying to do the right thing 99% of the time. How do we help them do that? And then the increasing motivation piece, that's where the social proof comes in. If they're seeing people around them doing this, oh, well, I should probably do that too. And then, of course, there's the reciprocity example, you know, that little bit of motivation, that gift to help push them in the right way.
Yes,
So,
perfect.
yeah, I would say reduce friction and increase motivation.
Yes, well, I'm going to apply that in various aspects of my life, and I want to thank you again. This has been wonderful.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming in.
Well, thank you, Spencer. It's been great to be here.
You know, one of the things I found most interesting about what Rebecca shared was this idea of the power paradox. For those of us who've worked in a corporate setting, we've seen it play out so many times with people in senior management. It's the classic scenario of someone who works their way up through the ranks, not just with hard work, but by treating other people respectfully and fairly. And this quality of, you know, willingness to help coworkers and the people that they oversee definitely makes managers more effective as leaders. But then what happens all too often is people who finally make it to the top and are put in charge of departments or divisions or even entire companies, they start to change. You notice that they start treating the people that work for them with little, if any, respect. And with some, their egos become unbearable. And everything they do is designed to benefit only themselves at the expense of everyone else, including the company. You know, I think it would be an exceptional CEO who could admit, even to themselves, that they've become self-centered and sometimes even nasty, or that their power-hungry behavior is making them less effective as a leader, even if that's pointed out to them by a qualified expert like Rebecca. So it would only be the most self-aware senior managers who would consider hanging out with people who they don't normally associate with, or try doing activities outside of their comfort zone, just to gain some feelings of humility, all with the hope that they'll change their own behavior. Unfortunately, I think the more common scenario in which the power paradox is overcome is purely by happenstance. It happens through the old adage, pride goeth before the fall. It often takes some catastrophic failure for these people to actually take stock of themselves and readjust their behavior, and revert back to showing some level of empathy and kindness to others. In my mind, the paradox is it often requires some major blunder with huge negative consequences in order for someone to achieve the highest levels of effectiveness as a leader. On a separate point, I really liked what Rebecca said about how giving a gift or showing a kindness is often more effective in getting someone to cooperate than holding the threat of punishment over their head. I think we sometimes don't want to be the first to make the concession, because we're worried that maybe it shows weakness. or makes the other person think they'll just get more favors for doing nothing. But I don't think that's normally what happens. That's just letting our paranoia get in the way. In my experience, people return kindness with more kindness. So I would recommend following Rebecca's advice and make the first move. Do some act of goodness and see what happens. You might be surprised. Before we close, I just want to thank everyone who gave me feedback on the show we recently did on the college selection and admissions process. It did give me some comfort that I'm not the only parent who appreciated what Dr. Eloise said about not letting our feelings of self-worth get too tied up with whatever college our kids get into. But I do have to admit, I sometimes fall into that trap. It's just that from the time your kids are born, you try to give them every advantage that your time or budget allows. For better or for worse, it's just the way things have gotten. As a parent, you spend just about every waking moment when you're not at work driving your kids to play dates, signing them up for every activity imaginable, helping them with their homework, and arranging their music lessons, tutors, or anything else that might enrich their lives. And it feels like the college process is the last push before they leave the nest that'll have such a huge impact on their future. Almost like you've been running a marathon, and the college process is the final sprint to the finish line. So you don't want to blow it that late in the game. But like everything else, the right answer lies in moderation and balance. One thing I've learned over the years is that there's only so much you can do to control outcomes, particularly when it comes to other people. And that applies to your own kids, too. So do what you can within reason, and then you just got to let the rest go. Anyway, I'll leave you with that final thought. That's our show for today. I'd love to hear from you, so please keep the emails coming through our website at watchhearmeout.com. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.